men being heads of their wives and their families. So let's go to verse 31. Start there. We're going to go all over the place in this text. It's so rich, so profound, so wonderful. If you would just see it and feel it for what it is, you wouldn't need next Sunday's sermon. You really wouldn't. Genesis 2:24 is quoted here in verse 31. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, hold fast to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. Then, verse 32, Paul says something about that Old Testament quotation. He talks about it this way. He says, this mystery is great or profound. And I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Now, why does he call a man leaving his mother and father and becoming one flesh with his wife a great mystery? The word mystery, many of you know this, in the New Testament does not mean something so deep and so strange and so perplexing that a human mind can't fathom it. That's not what mystery means. Mystery means something that God, in the secret counsel of His mind, has kept at least somewhat to Himself through the run of redemptive history, but now displays for us to understand and enjoy and obey. So don't think mystery imponderable here. Rather, think mystery revealed, once kept secret. And then he explains what that is. What was kept secret for so long was that even though the Old Testament often described, or at least sometimes described, the relationship between God and His people as a marriage, it never talked about the Messiah that way. And now he says, what marriage meant from the beginning was, and now is open for you to understand, Christ and the church. That's the point of saying this Genesis 2:24 is a great, profound mystery. And now I'm telling you the mystery. It is Christ and the church. So marriage is a metaphor. It's an image. It's a picture. It's a parable. It's a model that stands for something. And what it stands for is the relationship between Christ and His bride, the church. So the deepest meaning of marriage is that it's a living drama of how Christ and the church are to relate to each other. Now this is confirmed amazingly in verses 28 to 30. So let's read those. It's confirmed with parallels that Paul draws between Christ and the church being one body and husband and wife being one flesh. He's unpacking the parallel here. Verse 28. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, because no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. In other words, the one flesh union between a husband and a wife means that in a sense now they are one body, so that when a husband does anything for her, he does it for himself. Isn't that amazing that Paul would draw that out? That this union is of such a nature that a husband should think of a kind of application of whatever you would that men would do to you, do so to them. Only it's more profound than that. You do this to you when you do it to her. Let this sink in. This union means what you do for her, you do for you. Then verse 29. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of His body. See the parallel? What Christ does to the church, He does to Himself, because we are His body. So as husbands nourish and cherish their wives, they do it to their own bodies. And when Christ nourishes and cherishes the church, He does it to His own body. That's the parallel being drawn here between Christ and how He ministers to His church, and the husband and how he ministers to his own body, his wife. So when a husband cherishes and nourishes his wife, he cherishes and nourishes himself. And when Christ nourishes and cherishes the church, He cherishes and nourishes Himself, because the wife is one flesh with the husband, and the church is one body with Christ. Now, all of that is intended to underline the mystery, the meaning of the mystery, which is that marriage in its deepest meaning is a copy of Christ and His church. If you want to understand God's meaning for marriage, you have to grasp that we're dealing with a copy. Marriage isn't an end in itself. This is why marriage doesn't exist in the resurrection. It's a copy. Copies aren't needed anymore when the reality is fullest on its display. Here, they're needed. The world is filled with the need for this very kind of marriage. It won't be needed in the end. It's a copy. And what it's copying is an original, a reality, a truth. So it's a copy of a greater original. It's a metaphor of a greater reality. It's a parable of a greater truth. And the original, the reality, and the truth is God's marriage to His people, or Christ's marriage to His church. And the copy, the metaphor, and the parable is human marriage. Jeffrey Bromley, who wrote probably the best book on marriage I've ever read, and I haven't read many, and it's been long out of print, but I think we got it. Jeffrey Bromley, one of my teachers in church history of all things, wrote a book called, a great title, it's an absolutely great title, God and Marriage is the name of the title. And he said this: as God made man in His own image, so He made earthly marriage in the image of His own eternal marriage with His people. That's exactly right. Pause here. Men, I said a minute ago, if you really got this text, if it landed on you, you wouldn't need next Sunday's message, the application one, because I really believe that even though application is appropriate and nitty-gritty examples are helpful and good and right for preachers to give, I don't think that's the main way preaching works. I don't think that's the main way the Bible works. I think the main way the Bible works, and preaching that is faithful to the Bible works, is that the Bible displays glories that we are designed and made to know, and which we don't know because we're in the cesspool of soap operas. And by the Holy Spirit, in a moment of illumination, all of that can be just driven out, and something absolutely glorious enter into a human heart and change everything by virtue of its magnitude before any application ever arrives. You're just changed. Your heart soars with a new sense of what you're on the planet for, and what this woman in her magisterial dignity as your bride is about, and what you're living for here. And everything changes when something lands on you with a biblical force. That's what I would like to happen. I can't make that happen. lift my voice, I like to lift my voice, but